This video will discuss the role and contributions of the Continental Marine Corps, the predecessor to the United States Marine Corps, during the American Revolution. In order to understand their role in that conflict, we need some background information. What possessed the 13 colonies to take up arms against the King of England and declare their own independence? Before we get into the creation of the Marine Corps, we have to talk a little bit about why a Marine Corps was needed, specifically what was happening in North America before 1776. Let's follow this timeline beginning in 1763. In 1763, the British declared victory over the French in the French and Indian War with the help of the American colonies and people like George Washington. Because Great Britain desired to remain a world power, especially after the victory in the war, Great Britain imposed taxes on the American colonies to help pay for the cost of the French and Indian War. These taxes came into effect in 1764 with the Currency Act and Sugar Act, which put a higher tax on paper money and sugar. The following year, the British imposed the Stamp Act on everything from official documents to newspapers and playing cards. Some colonists understood the reasoning behind the Crown's decision, but they still wanted representation in Parliament to discuss things like taxes. They also thought the governors of each of the colonies had too much power. Additionally, some wanted to move away from the East Coast and into the West, which was restricted by the British, so resentment was there. Later on, the Crown instituted the Townshend Act and Tea Act, so things that were more commonly used by the colonists were being taxed. Resentment grew. One of the first major acts of defiance resulted in loss of life. This image represents the Boston Massacre in 1770, when a group of British soldiers opened fire on colonists, hitting 11 and eventually killing 5. Discontent continued, with many colonists wanting payback against the oppression and taxes more than ever. Many colonists, especially in the northeastern cities like Boston, felt the Tea Act had hurt their businesses. On 16 December 1773, a group of men dressed like Indians and boarded ships of the British East India Company. There, they dumped 10,000 pounds of tea, which is equivalent to $1,901,302 today. It is known today famously as the Boston Tea Party. As punishment, the British passed the Intolerable Acts in 1774, a series of 4 acts which included things like closing the port of Boston and allowing British troops into the homes of citizens without permission of the owner, the Quartering Act of 1774. It was only a matter of time before real conflict began. That happened in 1775. The first armed conflict occurred at the battles of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. We were then officially at war with the British Empire. By now, the Continental Congress was in place, and they wanted to make things official about the need to separate. That watershed moment was, of course, the Declaration of Independence, which was signed on 4 July 1776. It called for American citizens to have certain unalienable rights, like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It also called for a democratic government whose power derived from the people, unlike a king. The foundational document was signed in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In fact, it's the same city where the Marine Corps story begins. The Continental Congress needed men to fight if they had any hope to beat a highly professional army and navy in control of one of the world's largest empires in history. On 10 November 1775, 8 men gathered at Tun Tavern in Philadelphia. The Second Continental Congress authorized Captain Samuel Nicholas on that date to raise 2 battalions of Marines. It is now regarded as the Marine Corps birthday. Marines fought on land and at sea. Marines not only had to be able to understand how to operate at sea, they also had to be expert riflemen. They often fought on the fighting top of the ship and in the masts and rigging. It was the most elevated part of the ship and gave them a better vantage point to shoot. Marines fought in many sea battles during the American Revolution. They also took part in amphibious landings. After all, Marines are known as amphibious fighters, meaning they operate on land and at sea. They took part in the first landing of troops, meaning Marines and sailors, in American history in Nassau in the Crown Colony of the Bahamas. On 3 March 1776, 234 Marines and 50 sailors landed there and raised the Grand Union flag in the name of the Continental Armed Forces. In all, approximately 2,200 Marines fought in the American Revolution. 50 died in combat or at sea, including John Martin of Wilmington, Delaware, the first African American Marine who was lost at sea aboard the Continental ship Reprisal. After the war, the Marine Corps disbanded in 1783 until it was officially established in 1798 and has stayed that way ever since.